Hello, folks. This is Truby Chiaviello with PRIMO magazine, and I'm coming to you today from Washington, D.C., and it looks like we have a new pope, right? Pope Leo XIV, Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, the first American pope, the first pope born here in the United States, originally from Chicago, born and raised there in the Riverdale section. And he also happens to be Italian American. Pope Leo's father, his family was from the Piedmont region. His grandfather's name is Giovanni Pietro Felice Provosto, and he was born in the 1870s in Turin, Italy. He came to America. He died here in 1960 in Chicago. And so his son, Louis Marius Prevost, is the father of Pope Leo XIV. So this is pretty big news for us, having an Italian American pope. He shares with his predecessor, Pope Francis, his original homeland in Italy, which is Piedmont. Pope Francis was very Italian, although he was born and raised in Argentina. His father, Mario Bergoglio, came from the Piedmont region. The actual village that he came from was Porta Comora Stazioni. That was in the Este province. And he immigrated to Argentina in 1928. He married Regina Maria Savore, and her family came from Liguria, actually from the Italian Riviera. And they had 5 children. The firstborn was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, which later became Pope Francis. He was born in 1936. And he learned Italian from his grandmother, which was his mother's mother. She helped out with the family, babysat him and his brothers and sisters. And he learned fluent Italian by the time he was in elementary school. So he's very Italian. And so this shares with the new Pope this Italian connection. There's an Italian American community. We need to reach out to the new Pope. First American to be a Pope. We should all greet him enthusiastically. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about the faith, talk about Roman Catholicism, especially the legacy of Pope Francis. Since he's been Pope since 2013, for 12 years. He actually made the cover of PRIMO magazine. This was back in 2013. What happened was I just signed off on a new edition, and I'm driving down MacArthur Boulevard here in Washington, D.C., when I heard on the radio that they had a new Pope. They didn't tell me his name. They just said he was from Argentina, and he was the first Jesuit. And so I knew confidently that he was probably Italian, or he had some Italian background, because so many people in Argentina are originally from Italy. And sure enough, he was. His family very Italian, and he made the cover. His papacy was controversial, to say the least, although I don't think when you break it down, you look at his background and what he did, he might have been as controversial as some people had thought he was. But in my lifetime, there's been 6 popes. And so I remember well Pope Paul VI. He was elected to be Pope in 1963, and he served until 1978. And we had an article on him also in PRIMO because they named him a saint. And I remember growing up seeing his picture, his photograph, in most homes, because I grew up in Northeast New Jersey. There was a lot of Catholics there, a lot of Italian Americans. And you had his picture in a frame, and around the frame usually was the rosary beads. My aunt had this right across the street. I remember seeing his face there, a couple of photographs that she had framed. And then later on, of course, you had John Paul II and Mother Teresa. That was added to a lot of walls in the homes of Catholics. But he's now a saint. John Paul II is a saint. Before John Paul II was John Paul I. Pope Paul VI died in 1978. And another time, John Paul I was elected to the papacy in August of 1978. He only served 1 month. And so this raises an interesting topic in that they recently named him a saint. And he was there, the Pope, for only 1 month. And so what's going on there? Well, it's not as hard as it used to be a saint. Back in the old days, they would have somebody, a cardinal, whoever, a candidate for sainthood, and this person was his only goal, and they referred to him as the devil's advocate, was just to try and rip to pieces this candidate. They would just bring up all kinds of things about him or her to taint their reputation, taint their spirituality. And if the candidate could survive this incredible assault during the advocacy process, then you knew that he or she was worthy of sainthood. Well, under Pope John Paul II, they diminished that. So now it's easier for people to become saints. And so we've had over the years many people become saints, including many popes. So I believe probably 10 years from now, Pope Francis will probably be a saint. And the Pope who preceded him, Pope Benedict, will be a saint. Now, Pope Benedict, he served from 2005 to 2013. And he too might have been Italian. He was German, grew up in Germany, but his mother was originally from South Trio, which, as you know, is in Italy. At the time, I think it's always been between Austria and Italy, this area, but that's where his mother was from. So he might have some Italian blood if you dig into his genealogy. But the big pope, of course, in my lifetime was Pope John Paul II. First Polish Pope, from October 1978. He was elected to the papacy, and then he passed away in April of 2005. One of the longest serving popes. And he really had a tremendous impact on the faith. He grew Catholicism by leaps and bounds. I mean, it almost grew 50% under his watch. And so this is a situation we have to look at with Pope Leo XIV, and the state of Catholicism, in that since John Paul II, there's been a decrease in the rate of growth. You figure John Paul II, he grew the faith by 50%, but then Pope Benedict, who took over after he passed away, the faith only grew about 12%. And under Pope Francis, it's right around the same, 11% or 10% growth. So it's declining. But it's far from extinction. There's about 1.3 billion, by some estimates, maybe 1.4 billion Roman Catholics worldwide. So we have ways to go before we disappear. Under Pope Francis, there was the decline of growth, but he increased the number of Catholics in Africa. There was a huge jump in Africa for Catholicism, and also Asia. What's ironic about that is that both those areas, there's a lot of Christian persecution now taking place. To my regret, Pope Francis really didn't speak up about that too much. But that's where the main growth is happening in Catholicism. North America, Europe, there's been low, the numbers are decreased and they still remain low. But the biggest issue was the decline in growth in Central and South America under Francis. That's surprising. There's a graph here that you can see, and you can see that it declined significantly in some places. Pope Francis, to his credit, he made a lot of trips to Central and South America. He visited Brazil, he visited Mexico, Cuba, Ecuador, Paraguay, Chile, Peru, Colombia. But still, he wasn't able to increase the numbers there. The one place he didn't visit in Central and South America, it's kind of sad, was Argentina. That was his home country. He never went back. And that's indicative of what's going on with this situation, in that he came from a place famous for its political volatility. Big shifts happen in politics, a lot of passions. Political violence, and he didn't want to go back because he was worried that if he did return to Argentina, either those who opposed him or opposed the Catholic hierarchy there would maybe demonstrate or riot, or they might use his visit as an excuse to riot, the various political factions in Argentina. So he didn't go back. It's too bad because and he's a favorite son. He did something that no one else did in Argentina, become Pope. So we can maybe set aside politics or differences and celebrate him, but that didn't happen for him. So I thought that was too bad. I think he wanted to go, but I just think he didn't have time enough to just plan it and ensure that everything would be secure before his return visit. Pope Francis, a fascinating figure. I liked him. I used to promote him. I just say promote him, but any news that came out of the Vatican that he did, I often would put that on our social media sites, on our website. As I mentioned earlier, we did do a feature article. He made the cover of PRIMO. A priest in Ireland wrote for us, Michael Collins. It was a very good article on Pope Francis. He had just begun his papacy, and so a lot of us didn't know much about him. He achieved a reputation where he was embraced by the mainstream media as this progressive, as someone who was going to change the church. And that's really not why he was elected. He wasn't elected to change, and he didn't change the catechism. He didn't change the sacraments or the rules of morality that govern the church. What he was elected for, and what he did, was change the Vatican bureaucracy. That is why he was elected. The Vatican Bank, in particular, had come under a cloud of corruption, and that happened under Pope Benedict. To Pope Benedict's credit, he initiated an investigation into the bank, but at the same time, there was this terrible pedophile scandal, charges of child abuse and molestation of priests, and the cover-up by bishops. So Pope Francis was elected to kind of clean house because of his administrative background. That's what he was. He was an administrator. That's how he, his priesthood, his life as a priest was governed by his administrative services, what he was involved in. He was never a parish priest or a diocesan priest. He was part of the Jesuit order. He entered that order. He became a priest in 1969, and 4 years later, he serves as as in charge of the province, the provincial leader of the Jesuits, provincial superior of the Jesuits, and his job was to manage the Jesuit priests that were there under his watch in Argentina. And this is during the time of the Dirty War, where the right wing took over Argentina and were sending out death squads to kill people who opposed their government. These were left wing communists, trade unionists, students, what have you. And as you know, if you know anything about the Jesuits, you know that they're often politically involved. And so what Father Bergoglio at the time was doing was keeping a lid on everything. And he didn't win too many friends among the Jesuit community, but what he did do was survive the church, survive the Jesuits. He didn't want the Jesuits to be kicked out of Argentina like they had been in other countries in the past. And so that's what he was all about. He was chosen because he could be a good manager in a very politically volatile place, a place full of crises, and he could hold on to the church. They didn't want to tear down the edifice. What they wanted was to reform the bureaucracy of the Vatican. That's what he did. The Vatican Bank, which is always under a cloud of suspicion and corruption, although it's a lot smaller than other banks, more like a credit union, his job was to try and root out suspicious activity, money laundering, mobsters that might have been connected to the Vatican Bank. And for the most part, it looks like he did that. He appointed Cardinal Pell to do that, and it looks like he came as close as you could to reforming the Vatican Bank. It's not an easy job. And then the pedophile scandal, his management of that also is indicative of where he came from. This is a person who he had been the provincial superior, then he became a rector of a school in Argentina. He was always in managerial positions. And then he was plucked out of obscurity. He was sent into exile in Cordoba, which was a rural community, by the Jesuits because they didn't like it that he was very orthodox. He wasn't in favor of their reevaluation of the gospel through a Marxist lens, through a class warfare lens, which had become popular. And so they had sent him out to this small parish in Cordoba where he did a missionary work. But he was there just 2 years because the bishop, the Archbishop of Argentina, Antonio Quaracini, he was an immigrant from Naples. He brought him to Buenos Aires, made him an auxiliary bishop, then made him the coadjutor bishop, where he's in charge of all of the administration. And then in the 1990s, when Bishop Quaracini passed away, Pope Francis at the time, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and from that point he became a cardinal and rose up the ranks until he became Pope. But the idea was not for him to come in and change the theology per se, but just try to upgrade try to improve the management. Pope Benedict, who came before him, was a writer and a scholar, and although he initiated some of these investigations into the bank, into the pedophile scandal, he truthfully claimed he was not up to the task. He was in his 80s, and he just wasn't ready for this kind of dogfight that was going to have to occur. Pope Francis was embraced by the media. I think he was probably the most popular pope to the mainstream media than any that I've ever seen. And I just think a lot of people in the media, they weren't Catholic or they didn't understand the basics of Catholicism. It would be almost impossible for somebody like Pope Francis to change our theology, our catechism, what we say, what we think is right or wrong, the nature of sin, what have you. What he had under his watch progressives and other people that were there, and he tried to appease them and tried to appease other people. And I think that's how he managed things. He was a very savvy manager. He had a number of synods, the Synod on the Family, the Synod on Youth. The Synod on the Amazon was something where they flirted with the idea where that a priest didn't have to be celibate because the Amazon jungle was so difficult to get priests to go there. They thought, well, we just try to get anybody we can, per se, even if they are married or what have you. But that didn't happen. And then the Synod on Synodality was something that he had convened also. It wasn't completed before he died. People were concerned that this might be a back way for him to come in and reform the church. But the church went through a major overhaul and reform in Vatican II under Pope John the 23rd. So I'm not sure what this was all about, really. I think he wanted a listening situation to come along, but would he make long-term changes? I wasn't sure he was going to do that. And so by him doing that, that caused a lot of controversy within the faith. Two things that he did that I thought were good, and two things that he did that I thought were not too good. One was the Year of Mercy. I thought that was a great thing that Pope Francis did, allowing bishops to decide if they can give communion to divorced couples. Laudate Si, the encyclical that he had on the environment, of course, that was very welcomed. I think the church was behind that, though. But if you read the encyclical, it wasn't just about preserving the environment or the ecology. It was also about the poor. And I thought this was very important. The bureaucracy changes that he made, the reform of the Vatican Bank. And two things that he did that I didn't think were good. One was the crackdown on the traditional Mass, the Traditionis Custodes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but this was something that he had put out there. And this was to restrict the Latin Mass. Under Pope Benedict, he was more traditional. He embraced the Tridentine Rite, the Latin Mass. The Mass that we have today was reformed back in the late 60s. It wasn't what our grandfathers or our grandparents had attended. And a lot of churches offered this. Now, the church that I belong to, St. Mary Mother of God in Washington, D.C., in Chinatown, we offered the Latin Mass every Sunday. We did so because we needed people to come to church. The church that we have right there in Chinatown, Washington, D.C., has seen better days, high crime, other things happen. In order to get people to come, we try to offer different things. We offered a 7:30 Mass, which was the latest Mass on Sunday. That's the one I usually attend. But in addition, we offered the Latin Mass as one of several Masses during Sunday morning and the afternoon, just to get people to come who wanted to celebrate the Tridentine Rite. But what Pope Francis did was to let the bishops decide if they wanted to allow the Latin Mass, and if so, how. And what our bishop did in Washington, D.C., I mean, it was a done deal, really. A lot of bishops don't like the Latin Mass because many of them came of age during Vatican II, and so they believe in this new Catholicism that we have. And he transferred the Latin Mass out of our church to the Franciscan monastery. The parish priest we had, Father Vincent de Rosso, did a marvelous job. He survived the church through COVID-19, decriminalization of marijuana that caused a crime wave in our neighborhood, the riots, the assault on the U.S. Capitol. They turned that area into an armed camp for a while. And through it all, not only did he survive the church, but he allowed the church to be redone. We had to rebuild the altar, the ceiling, the electrical power was needed to be fixed, and needed all this from the people. All chipped in money to upgrade the church. He's no longer serving as the parish priest, but because of Pope Francis's rule, when they transferred the Latin Mass out of our church, we lost half of our parishioners. We lost half our money, half our volunteers. And that's just been the way it's been with urban parishes. It's tough to keep them going. So that was regrettable. My feeling about that, looking back on it all, was I think Pope Francis did that to appease the bishops here in the United States more than any place else. I think they must have told him that the Latin Mass adherents were church militants. They were these radical conservatives, so to speak. I think later on he realized that probably wasn't the case, and he even said it to an interviewer that no, the Latin Mass is not banned. So maybe perhaps he would have changed his mind and allow that for the parish priest to allow this to have the Latin Mass. The child abuse scandal was something that I think he, it's really hard to talk about this because it's so terrible what's happened, and here in the United States in particular. But he kept a close eye on the bishops who were accused of covering up, and then as more evidence came, he purged the system. But he suffered in Chile because back in 2018, the bishop Juan Barros was accused of covering up child abuse accusations in the archdiocese there. And Pope Francis came to his defense, came to his very strong defense, actually, only until it was shown that he was wrong, that the bishop was covering up serious accusations, criminal behavior, and Pope Francis had to apologize to the victims. He invited them to the Vatican, and that's kind of what happened. So that, I think, probably was regrettable. I think in my case, when I say this is that Cardinal McCarrick was the cardinal here in Washington, D.C., and it was a church I was attending, St. Thomas the Apostle, which was right in the Woodley Park neighborhood of Washington. A lot of young people were attending that church, and he had been the bishop. He had retired, and he showed up to convey a homily, and he said he was going to show up every month. Well, we never saw him again. So at that time, I think at the time Pope Benedict had sent in an investigator to investigate accusations of his child of his abuse of people, male priests, and so he was banned from making any public appearances. So he disappeared. He was the bishop, by the way, in Newark, New Jersey, when I was confirmed. But he ended up in the Vatican under Francis. And this was a shock to people, because Francis recruited McCarrick. This is after he's almost going to get indicted for crimes. But he sent him to China to raise money. And everybody was, was shaking their heads about that. But that was just kind of the method of his management. Was he kind of kept an eye on everyone, kept them in the church hierarchy until the cases came, the evidence came, and then he would purge them out, kick them out. He did that in Chile. He ended up really firing the bishop and many of the priests involved in covering up the scandal there. But Pope Francis was very active in Italy. He made many visits, as many of the popes do, all throughout Italy. He went to Lampedusa, where he talked about the migrants. This was back in 2014. And then a year later, he went to Assisi to pay homage to St. Francis of Assisi. He visited that area quite several times. In Naples and Pompeii in 2015, he visited there. And he really came out in strong condemnation against organized crime. He did that in Naples, and he did that in Palermo. He talked about in Palermo when he was there in 2019, a priest, Pino Puglisi, was killed by the mafia, and he spoke about that. He went to Turin. He venerated the Shroud of Turin there. In Florence, he met with the bishops, and he spoke about the poor. In Milan, back in 2017, he visited a prison and spoke to the prisoners there, brought attention to those in need of evangelization in prison. And he went to Matera, went to Venice, Verona. The last place he visited in Italy was Trieste before he passed away. Sad to see him go, but we welcomed the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, also with some Italian background, American background. I think the Italian-American community, we should do what we can to reach out to him and make a connection, because Roman Catholicism and Italy are tied together very strongly. That's where Rome is, that's where the Vatican is, and that's where so many situations and things about Roman Catholicism evolved over the years right there in Italy. So it's a new day for the Italian-American community. It's a new day for Italians and Catholics all over the world. We have new Pope, God bless him. And I look forward to following what he does and reporting on that as the days, weeks, years go on. Thank you very much for watching today, and please subscribe and please like this video. I hope to have more video coming your way. We have a new edition coming out. On the cover is Giuseppe Garibaldi, and that should be in the mail to you very, very soon. Thank you very much for watching.